2013 with Gretsch for the GDP with legendary rock guitarist and all-around good guy Steve Hunter. You may have heard of him from Lou Reed, Alice Cooper, Peter Gabriel, and a slew of others responsible for some legendary playing. Steve's here to help us show off the new Gretsch Black Falcon Center-Block model guitar, the 16-inch body width, 2-inch depth with a plank down the center, which is something Gretsch has not had in the past. And we're hoping that we can see how it may differ in response and behavior from a similar guitar without a center block. So we're going to have Steve play whatever he likes to play. We're going to pull to a higher gain setting. We're using an EVH combo amp at a 1 watt setting. We've got a 3-channel situation going on here, and we want to see how this baby responds when it rocks. So we're going to the famous channel 2. We're going to push it further to channel 3.
That's the sound.
What kind of sustain do we get if we hold a note for forever?
We'll see.
Going to take a minute and switch to the White Falcon without a center block and see if we hear any difference.
I want to check the tuning.
No, I need you to play exactly what you played before in every setting.
Good. We'll have to go back and watch.
We're going to go to channel 2 here and see if we can blow it up. I have to ask about your technique. You no thumb pick, no. You are holding a pick.
I hold it, and it's weird. It's weird. Okay, this is something I learned to do a long time ago. I don't even know when I learned it or why I learned it. Except there was, I think it was during the Nightmare tour with Alice in '75. I had to do some little finger picking stuff on Only Women Bleed, I think. And the reason I'm not clear is because I just noticed myself doing it. So to free up my fingers, I found a way to put the pick between my first and second finger, and I can still finger pick. So I can still do the. But if I need it, the pick's right there.
But you frequently, when you're doing the faster lead, you are finger picking that.
Yeah, you know why I can't play very fast with a pick? I never learned how to do that. So
but it makes that pretty effortless to get to the.
it's much easier,
Yeah.
and I can do a lot of jumping around stuff that I can't do with a pick. There's a lot of guys that can do that. There are guys that play so much faster than I can. But occasionally, when I want to just do a little flurry or something,
Right.
I just find I like the sound of my fingers on the string as opposed to pick. A pick is a different sound. So like for that kind of thing, you got to have a pick. Or if you're doing, you got to have a pick. You got to hear that. But for the kind of things that I like to do with, so I can get those little chunks in the middle, and I can also vary how I pick the strings varies the tone. So about, I don't know, 25 years ago or so, I use a pick less and less and less. You know, when I have to do, you know, you can't do that really with your fingers as well as you can with a pick. So I tend to use a pick for that. So that's why I put between the first two fingers. I don't know how I even learned to do it. I just found myself doing it one night.
It was an instinctive thing.
Instinctive thing. And the pick is right there. So I just, like that, I'm right on the pick, you know, so it's really quick.
And when you're doing the alternate strings on the lead flurries, are you usually on adjacent strings or you're skipping strings sometimes?
Sometimes I skip strings because I like the sound of the when it's really kind of loud. It's a weird flurry. You can't tell what I'm doing exactly, which all guitar players like. If you can't tell what somebody else is doing,
Exactly.
you know, you got to do that.
Oh, we shouldn't have given it away.
Well, that's okay. I'll give away a little bit. So that's okay. But and also there's things I can do. That kind of stuff is. With a pick, it sounds good. That kind of stuff. There's just certain things that just sound really cool with your fingers.
And without the pick, you can accent which of those strings you're hearing
Exactly.
in that triad. Or in that.
Exactly. And you can arpeggiate things better. There's like some guys that do these sweeps and stuff.
Yeah.
Just blow me away. I don't know how they do it so fast and so smooth. Jason Becker is one of the geniuses of that stuff. He's a good dear friend of mine. And, I just have to kind of cheat and use my fingers because I never learned how. Speed has never been one of my priorities. It's always been bending and vibrato and phrasing, stuff like that. That's my priority. So I never sat down and took the time. I know it takes ages to be able to play smooth and fast. It's a lot of work. So the guys out there, I applaud them for that, for being able to do that. But for me, vibrato and tone coming from your fingers, not so much from everything else. Phrasing, vibrato, all those things mean more to me than being able to play fast. So I sacrifice speed because to get the certain tone that I like, you have to raise the strings up fairly high compared to what if you're playing speed stuff. So a lot of guys hate my guitars, which is really great because I don't think anybody's going to steal them because they're hard to play, you know. But I like them because the tone, when you bend the string, the tone is just a little better when you have a little more distance.
So you formulate as nines and higher action.
Yes, and some guitars I use 10s. Just depends on the guitar.
Yeah, these are 25.5-inch scale, so they might want
the longer scale you put lighter strings. Plus, I like nines. I like the tone of nines. Nines have a certain kind of twang to them. Now that's a trade-off because 10s have a little more power. So, of course, they trade off a little. But nines to me have more of a liquidy, sexy kind of feel to them, as opposed to 10s. The 10s are powers and balls, if I can say that on.
You just did.
But you know, everybody out there, even girls know what they mean when you say the guy's got balls. You know, so.
But some girls have balls.
Some girls have a lot of balls, and it scares the hell out of them. You know, but that's the reason those things have developed. I've always liked the lighter strings for the twanginess of them and for the smooth liquid sound.
So let's try some of your more legato, smooth liquid stuff on this guitar, and then we'll go back to the other one.
Okay.
And let me ask whether you're feeling a difference in the response between the two guitars.
No question.
Yeah.
No question.
Okay.
This guitar is a little more throaty sounding and a little less sustaining. Not quite as powerful, but in its own sense, it has its own tones.
Sure.
It's a little different. So the that's on the neck pickup, which I tend to gravitate towards.
Sure.
Because it's got a more what I call woman tone. It's what Clapton used to call me years ago, woman tone, which I like. This guitar has a little more of a little warmer woman tone sound on the neck position than the other guitar did, but the other guitar has more power. So depends on the kind of thing you're going to do, the kind of playing you're going to do, which one you prefer. The other one also sustains more because of that block, I'm sure. That's what it is. But, I mean, having said that, it's like two different guitars that offer two different voices.
We'll switch back to the other and try some of the legato.
I'll show you some stuff on the others,
We're back to the Black Falcon Center-Block model, or what I call the Black Planker.
Nice, I like that.
Yeah, we're good. Let's try some lead pickup stuff there.
Now let's try the.
Do you have trouble in a live situation where I tend to get all adrenalined up
Yeah.
with playing too hard and impeding your fairly delicate touch with that two-finger approach?
Well, sometimes. Really, it depends on what I'm doing. When I was doing the Alice's tour in 2011, it was all pretty much balls out all the way through. So there was no real subtlety. There's not a lot of room for subtlety when it's a wall of sound. That's what we wanted. And three guitars really does that. If each guy kind of does his job, it just makes this wonderful wall of sound. But you have to sacrifice some things to get that power. And one of the things you end up sacrificing is some of the subtleties, which is, that's all right. That's just part of the gig. On my kind of stuff now, I'm so much more into subtlety and so I'm tending towards cleaner sounds. Not totally clean, but cleaner sounds. So that when you pick softer, like when you have a guy, I'll show you.
You want the clean or dirty?
The same channel we have, the same channel. You see what happens is that when you have a really high gain, you're going to lose subtlety. But you sacrifice subtlety for the power. So, and when you get in that middle ground of sort of a crunch sound, then you get back some of the subtlety. And picking with your fingers can control the tone more. When you have high gain, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, doesn't matter what you do, it's going to come out like that, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what a lot of people like, and that's what happens in rock. You want to have that kind of power.
So that it almost doesn't matter how hard you're playing, because you've
Exactly.
got so much gain that it's going to scream anyway.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. You don't have to worry so much about controlling anything. You just go for it. And then the picking technique just acts as a way to revoice some of the notes. So you pick them a little harder, they come out a little differently than when you pick them lighter. And you know, I mean, there is subtlety, but it's a much narrower band. You know, whereas like if you have a crunch kind of sound or a clean sound, as soon as you have a clean sound, you have an enormous range of subtlety. But as a trade-off is in that you have to refine your technique sound, because you're going to hear little boo-boos. You know, I have trouble with it all the time. I know it's like I chose the one thing that makes me work the hardest. So I'm an idiot, you know. I mean, it's great just to crank it up and wail and have a blast, which was fun to do with Alice. But now in my own stuff, I'm kind of more bluesy. So I'm trying to do more with subtlety, which means that any little nuance, any little thing I do on the fretboard is obvious, even the bad stuff. So I have to be really careful. So it sort of refines your technique a bit.
I've got your short stories album, and I've listened to it many times, and I don't know song titles because I'm an instrumental. There's you know nothing to hang the hook on. So,
That's right.
but I hear it in my head, and what I love about that is the combination of textures from clean to dirty. But it's not just a clean tone and a dirty tone.
Right.
There's a whole range
That's right.
of tones in between, and they've got different tonal contours.
Exactly.
And it's just very skillfully done, and a beautiful album to listen to with a lot of sonic variety, although it is a fairly heavy palette most of the way through.
Yeah, it is.
It's got some variation, and the new album is much bluesier.
It's what I call melodic blues. It's not traditional blues, but I use what I learned from traditional blues to create melodies. Way back when I was learning how to play blues, I thought it was all just kind of licks. You know, you excuse me, you learn a bunch of licks and you put them together, and that's a solo. But as I learned more and more, and especially from B.B. King, it's a long story, but I met him and he taught me a lot when I asked him some questions about playing blues. And he gave me some insight into phrasing, which is that ambiguous sort of, what the hell's a phrase? You know, it's a complicated, abstract thing to sort of discuss. But especially on the guitar, because it's very personal too. Your phrasing is different than mine, and everybody's different. But what blues guitar players did that I loved was that when they played a solo, you could sing the solo, and so it made it melodic instead of just riffs. They were melody bits that they strung together, not riffs, because they were sometimes a little different each time, you know. And B.B. King was like the king of that. He's the king of that because he can do more with 3 notes than most guys can do with 1,000. He would play a solo like that. I loved that. I could listen to that for hours upon hours, and I did. And all the stuff I learned about phrasing and note selection and all that stuff was all straight from B.B. King, then from Eric Clapton with Cream, and then with Jimi Hendrix and Michael Bloomfield. All those guys taught me that it is sort of riffs, but at some point you stop thinking of them in terms of riffs. You think of them in terms of these little melodic gems, you know, and you kind of hang them together like a little necklace, and then it becomes this melody. You should be able to, if you think about it, some of your favorite guitar solos, you can sing them, of course, and that means that it's touching you somehow. So that's what I gravitated toward my whole career, is let's make a melody solo. Let's not just play a bunch of riffs and kind of show off and stuff. That's fun too, but for me, what really gets me in the heart, and hopefully I get other people in the heart, is when you play from the heart. And stringing together those little phrases into a melodic solo is one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life, and that's what I love about it. It's a challenge every time you have to come up with a thing like that. You know, it's great. That's what I've always loved about blues. So that's what my album is going to be like. It's all blues melody.
So the tunes on the new album are composed, and the melodies are composed entities. They're not random jams.
No.
They're not the blues jam at the local bar. They're
No,
songs.
No, there's songs, but there is openness for jam because blues its root is in jamming. But when you jam melodic bits. You don't jam riffs. You jam melodies, little melodies.
So you're challenging yourself to compose those melodies on the fly, in a blues idiom.
Exactly. That's what jazz guys do. Just like Simpson said, you know, all those jazz guys are making all that stuff up. You know,
That's the point.
That's the point.
Yeah.
And with blues, you can listen to Albert King. There's some beautiful melodies that guy could just come up with on the spot with all that bending stuff he does there. It's just awesome stuff, and that challenged me. That's what I want to do.
When did you have the encounter with B.B. King?
Well, it's a long story. I'll try to condense it a bit. I was in a band when I got out of the military. When I moved back to Decatur, I got in a band called the Light Brigade. This is some friends of mine, and we were huge B.B. King fans. Back in those days, when you did a bar gig, you had to do like 5 sets.
Yep.
You know, it was like 8 to 2 in the morning or something.
Done.
Yeah, and we did a whole set of B.B. King because we were huge fans. So we found out he was playing in Chicago. So we drove for 3.5 hours to Chicago, sat at the bar, and had two really bad Cokes that cost a lot of money because that's all we could afford. Because they sit at the bar and listen to him, and he was just amazing. So after the show, I mean, he's just kind of hanging in front of the stage. I thought, I got to go talk to this guy, and because I couldn't figure out why when I played what he's playing, it doesn't sound like him. I couldn't figure it out. So I went up to him. I said, BB, I probably just gushed all. He's probably thought, God, this guy's weird. You know, he's a weird, long-haired kind of sodbuster from Decatur. You know. So I told him, I said, I listen to all your records. I'm trying to learn how to play blues off your records. But every time I play them, they don't sound like you. And I said, is it because I don't understand blues and soul because I'm white? And he laughed so hard. I didn't mean that as a joke. I thought that was it. I got to be black to play that stuff because I understood the history and everything that goes into that. And he said, no, man, you don't have to be. It's not because you're white. And I said, well, I don't understand blue. Why? He said, look, have you ever had a girl treat you really badly? And I said, well, sure. He said, well, you remember how you felt? I said, well, yeah, it was terrible, you know, and heartbreaking and stuff. He said, put that in your fingers. And that was the first time anybody had ever told me that music is feeling. Nobody had ever told me that. Now, suddenly, I'm seeing music in a whole different way than I was before. And then he said probably the most important thing. He said, look, man, you learn from my records, but don't try to copy me. Learn from my records. Make the blues your own, because then you'll keep it alive that way. I walked out of there in a daze. I just talked to the king of blues, and he'd just given me 2 nuggets of wisdom that nobody had ever given me. It changed my whole life, my whole outlook on playing. Now when I sat down and played with B.B. King records, I didn't think I had to sound like him. I could do it my way. Opened up a whole new world to me, and it changed my whole life. Everything in my career is based on what he said, those 2 things. It was the most important thing that happened.
Steve, can you play a little snippet of something from your new album that you're working on, or is it?
I can't because
it takes the band.
It takes took a village to do that, you know. So I can't really. What I did was I did a lot of layering kind of stuff, which I've always loved. That's another thing about the recording process I've always admired, is that you can layer various instruments in different places, and you sort of orchestrate. And I like that.
You're working on a computer now with workstation software?
Yeah, we use Pro Tools LE.
You've got an engineer with you.
No, I do it myself. It's a cheap way of doing it, I know, but I do it myself. I actually love it anyway. I kind of like tweaking the knobs.
It's tedious.
It is tedious, but I do love it. I mean, it's fun. Sometimes it gets very frustrating because there's some things that come up that I can't figure out how to fix. But every time I fix something, I've learned something new about Pro Tools. And the only reason I picked Pro Tools is because it's one that when I opened up the screen, it looked the most natural to me. I think there are a lot of great software out there. Logic is brilliant. And Pro Tools, just when I opened up that window and I saw the mixing console on there, it looked just like what I'd seen before. So I just felt more comfortable.
Steve, I appreciate your time and your nuggets of insight. I wonder if you could go way back in the past and favor us with a little bit of Sweet Jane on the way out.
I can do the, yeah, like I said, if I remember exactly how I played it. You want this part then? Unfortunately, that's all it does. For always so, I mean,
But you know what's cool about that is it's it's become iconic and it's simple,
yeah, it's very simple.
but you came up with it.
Now, well, that particular part, Dick Wagner and I both sort of worked out the rhythm because the original rhythm was a little more like it's a little like
It's going like that.
yeah, it was a little more, it was gentler.
Yeah.
And we said we're going to hit it. We're going to hit it. So it's the same chords, but we just hit them a little harder.
Sure.
And it worked, you know. The intro's a whole nother story. The intro to Sweet Jane's a whole nother story. And that's very difficult to play with one guitar. You sort of can, but it's not as good. You need to have two guys.
Some other time.
Some other time.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.